My wife wanted to be a surrogate for her rich boss. I told her flat out, "Don't do it. This will destroy us." But she just looked me in the eye and said, "It's my body, my choice." That was the moment I knew. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to own it. So I made it simple. Not my baby, not my problem. People think that sounds cold. Maybe it does. But when you've spent years breaking your back to keep a roof over your family's head, only to watch your wife volunteer her body to carry another man's child, you start to realize something. There's a line you can't come back from. And let me tell you, my entire world flipped upside down, like a pancake on a Tuesday night in October. One minute I thought I had a family, a home, a marriage. The next minute, everything I knew was gone. My name's Jack Miller. I'm 42 years old, father of 3, and I live in a quiet suburb just outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous, just a small 2-story house with a squeaky screen door and a patchy lawn I keep promising to fix. I work as a claims manager at an insurance company. Paper stacks, fluorescent lights, and coffee that tastes like burnt regret. It doesn't light my soul on fire, but it pays the mortgage. And let me tell you, that mortgage feels like a heavyweight champion knocking me down every month. Still, life wasn't bad. I had 3 kids who turned my world upside down in the best ways: Jake, Emma, and little Sophie. Evenings were filled with spilled juice boxes, soccer practices, and arguments about bedtimes. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Or at least, I thought it was. Because the night Rachel sat me down on that old garage sale couch, everything I thought I knew about my life began to crack. Middle-class America isn't a dream, it's a treadmill. You run every day, but you don't really get anywhere. My morning started with the alarm blaring at 6:15, a quick shave in the foggy bathroom mirror, and a mad dash to get the kids out the door with something resembling breakfast in their hands. The mortgage sat on my shoulders like a boulder. Every first of the month, that payment reminder glared at me like a bully, daring me to flinch. Then there were the kids. Jake begging for new sneakers that cost more than my first car, Emma insisting she needed the latest iPad for school projects, and Sophie throwing tantrums when she didn't get ice cream for dinner. Work wasn't much better. 8 hours a day in a beige cubicle, filing claims for people I'd never meet. It wasn't fulfilling, it wasn't exciting, but it was steady. And I clung to steady, because I thought steady meant safe. Turns out steady was just the calm before the storm. Looking back, the signs were there. Rachel had this nervous smile she pulled out whenever she was hiding something. The kind of smile that said, "Please don't ask questions because you won't like the answers." One Tuesday night, after we finally got the kids wrangled into bed, I was stretched out on our beat-up leather couch flipping through Netflix like it was a second job. That's when Rachel came in and, this was my first red flag, sat down right next to me. Normally she claimed her own end of the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through Instagram, pretending her high school friends had perfect lives. But not that night. She sat close. Too close. And she had that look, the same look she wore right before telling me she'd bought something expensive without asking. Then she opened with one single word. So. No good news in marriage ever starts with so. It's the drum roll before the bad news crashes in. "So," she began, and right then my stomach dropped. 8 years of marriage had taught me that nothing good ever followed that word. "So" was the prelude to bad news. The car needs new brakes, her mother's staying for a month, or we just maxed out another credit card. I muted the TV, some forgettable crime show that solved murders in exactly 42 minutes, and turned toward her. "What's up, Rach?" I asked, already regretting it. Her hands twisted in her lap, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. That nervous smile flickered again, but this time it didn't hide the weight behind her words. "I've been thinking about doing something different," she said carefully, like she was laying down the first card in a dangerous game. I felt that familiar cold knot forming in my chest. Whatever this was, it wasn't small, it wasn't trivial. It was the kind of so that changes everything. She took a breath, and then it came out, flat, calm, like she was telling me we were out of milk. "I'm going to be a surrogate," Rachel said, "for Richard Coleman and his wife." For a second, I laughed. I actually laughed because what else do you do when your wife tells you she's planning to carry another man's baby? I thought it was a joke, some weird attempt at humor after a long day. "Good one, Rach," I said, reaching for the remote. "Now what are we really watching?" But she didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. She just sat there, eyes locked on me with that deadly seriousness she usually saved for parent-teacher conferences or our credit card debt. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a joke. My wife, the mother of my 3 kids, was seriously planning to grow another man's child inside her. And in that moment, I knew my life had just taken a nosedive off a cliff. "Rachel," I said slowly, like I was talking to one of the kids after they'd done something unbelievably stupid. "Please tell me you're kidding." But she didn't flinch. She didn't smirk. She just shook her head, calm as a surgeon about to make the first cut. A cold wave washed over me, the kind you get on a roller coaster when the big drop finally hits. My chest tightened, like someone had strapped a rubber band around my ribs and started twisting. She kept talking, about how Richard and Victoria had been trying for years, about miscarriages, about doctors saying it was too risky for Victoria to carry a baby. She spoke with this practiced tone, like she'd rehearsed it 100 times in her head. Meanwhile, I was frozen on that couch, staring at the woman I thought I knew, realizing she wasn't joking. She wasn't exaggerating. She was serious. Dead serious. And suddenly, my marriage didn't feel like mine anymore. Then she dropped another detail, one that made my blood run colder. "Richard asked me last week if I'd consider it," she said, like she was telling me about a lunch order. "We talked, and I think it's the right thing to do. Richard, not Mr. Coleman, not Richard. Since when was my wife on a first-name basis with her billionaire boss? Since when was she having private conversations about starting his family without me even knowing?" I sat forward on the couch, pulse hammering in my ears. "Rachel, no, absolutely not. This isn't babysitting their dog while they go on vacation. This is carrying another man's child. Our marriage won't survive it." She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. That stung worse than the words. Like my fear, my anger, didn't matter. In that moment, the lines blurred. Was this about helping his family, or about how close my wife had already gotten to her boss? "Rachel, listen to me," I said, my voice sharper than I meant, but there was no way to soften it. "This isn't a favor. This isn't charity. This will destroy us." She crossed her arms, the same way she did when she was about to ignore me. "You're overreacting. It's just a medical procedure. I'm helping them have a family." "Helping them?" That phrase lit me up. "What about our family?" I snapped, pointing at the crayon marks on the wall, the photos of our kids lined up on the mantel. "What about Jake, Emma, Sophie? What happens when they ask why mom's carrying someone else's baby?" But Rachel just shook her head, like I was missing the point, like I was the selfish one. "This isn't noble, Rachel," I said, feeling my throat tighten. "It's madness. And if you go through with it, it won't just change you. It will end us." She sighed, the kind of sigh that dripped with condescension. "Jack, you're acting like I'm cheating on you. This isn't an affair. It's a medical procedure." Her tone was calm, almost rehearsed, like she'd already had this debate a dozen times in her head and knew all the lines. I leaned forward, gripping my knees so tight my knuckles went white. "You really think slapping a medical label on it makes it okay? You think our kids won't notice? You think I can just look at you, pregnant with another man's child, and pretend it's business as usual?" She rolled her eyes again, like I was the unreasonable one. "It's not about us, Jack. It's about them. Richard and Victoria can't have children. I can help. Why can't you see that?" I stared at her, stunned. My wife was willing to torch our marriage, our family, our future, for her boss. And suddenly, I wasn't sure I recognized the woman sitting in front of me anymore. After that night, something in Rachel shifted. Or maybe it had been shifting for a long time and I was just too blind to see it. She moved through the house like a guest, not a wife. She spent more time on her phone, texting with work, taking calls in the other room with the door half shut. When I walked in, her voice always dropped a notch, like I wasn't supposed to hear. At dinner, she stopped sitting across from me and started sitting next to the kids. At bedtime, she scrolled through her screen instead of talking to me. The little routines that made us just evaporated. And when she did look at me, it wasn't the warm smile I'd fallen for years ago. It was colder, distant, like she'd already chosen another team and I was just the opposition standing in her way. That was the first time I realized I wasn't fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting against it. The fight circled the drain for weeks. Every night I tried to reason with her, plead with her even. I brought up the kids, the money, the stress, the toll it would take. I told her flat out, "Rachel, this will rip our family apart." And every night she brushed it off. Until one evening, she finally snapped. She stood in the kitchen, arms folded, eyes blazing. "Jack, I don't need your permission. This is my body, my choice." There it was, the line in the sand. 8 years of marriage reduced to 5 words that slammed into me harder than any punch could. My chest tightened, my ears rang. She wasn't asking anymore. She was declaring war. I realized in that moment we weren't partners. We weren't a team. We were just 2 people splitting bills under the same roof, and she had already decided which hill she was willing to die on. And it wasn't ours. That night, after she fired off those 5 words, "It's my body, my choice," I sat alone in the living room long after she went upstairs. The TV was still on, muted, flickering shadows across the walls. But I wasn't watching. I was staring at the crayon marks on the paint, the photos of our kids taped to the fridge, and the old couch that had carried more family movie nights than I could count. And it hit me. All of it. The house was still standing, but the foundation, our marriage, had cracked. Bad. The kind of crack you don't fix with duct tape and a promise to do better next time. For 8 years, I believed we were building something together. A team, a family. But sitting there in the glow of that useless television, I realized she'd already left the team. She just hadn't moved out yet. And once a marriage cracks like that, it never looks the same again. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster while Rachel breathed steady on the other side of the bed, like she didn't just set fire to our life. My mind kept running in circles, images of our wedding day, her laugh when we were broke and young and thought love was enough, the look on her face when Jake was born. I kept asking myself, where did that woman go? When did the teammate I married turn into a stranger planning to carry her boss's baby? I thought about our kids upstairs, sleeping soundly, unaware that their family was hanging by a thread. How was I supposed to protect them from this? How was I supposed to explain any of it? The hours dragged on. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same thing. Rachel, smiling at Richard Coleman's office, offering him something that was never supposed to be his. By the next morning, I held on to this fragile hope that maybe she'd cooled off overnight. Maybe she'd wake up, see the insanity in all of this, and back down. But Rachel came downstairs with her hair tied up, her gym clothes on, and a look in her eyes that told me exactly the opposite. She poured her coffee, calm as Sunday morning, and said, "I've thought about it more, Jack. I'm going through with it. Richard and Victoria need this, and I can do it." That was it. No debate, no hesitation, like she'd already crossed some invisible line in her mind and wasn't turning back. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. She was steady, resolute, even proud, while I sat there gripping my mug, wondering when exactly I lost my wife. It wasn't just determination, it was defiance. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just arguing with Rachel, I was losing her. Later that week, Rachel tried a different angle. We were sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread out like landmines between us, when she leaned forward with that practiced calm. "Jack," she said, "you don't understand. Richard and Victoria deserve a family. They've been through so much. Miscarriages, treatments that didn't work, years of heartbreak. Don't they deserve a chance at happiness?" Her words sounded noble, almost saintly, but all I could hear was the echo of betrayal. I slammed the electric bill shut and looked at her. "What about our family? Don't we deserve stability? Don't our kids deserve a mother who's focused on them, not her boss's baby?" She pursed her lips, that stubborn fire in her eyes. "This isn't about you, Jack. It's bigger than us. Bigger than us." That was the phrase that drove the knife deeper. Because nothing, no cause, no noble act, was supposed to be bigger than the family we already had. I tried to stay calm, to reason with her like adults do when the stakes aren't life-altering. Rachel, do you even remember what your pregnancies were like? With Emma, you couldn't keep anything down for 3 months. Your back was killing you. You cried every night from exhaustion. You really want to put yourself through that again. For them? She shrugged like I was exaggerating. Okay, forget the health part, I pressed. What about our kids? What happens when Jake's friends start whispering about why his mom's pregnant with someone else's baby? How do you think Emma's going to explain that to her classmates? Still nothing, just that stubborn stare. Fine, let's talk money. 25 grand won't even cover the medical bills, let alone 9 months of your life. We're drowning in debt already. You think this makes us more secure? It doesn't. I laid it all out. Health, emotions, finances, every reason stacked like bricks. But Rachel? She just knocked them down with a single look. She waited for me to finish, then tilted her head like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Jack, you don't get it. This isn't about bills or comfort. It's about doing something bigger than myself. It's a selfless act. Selfless. That word hit me like a slap. I laughed, bitter and hollow. Selfless? Rachel, giving up a Saturday to coach Jake's soccer team is selfless. Carrying your boss's baby while ignoring your own family? That's not selfless. That's reckless. But she just straightened her shoulders, like she was wearing a halo no one else could see. Richard and Victoria will finally have the family they've dreamed of. I can give them that gift. Gift. She kept saying that word like it was sacred. Meanwhile, I sat there staring at our stack of overdue bills, our kids' drawings taped to the fridge, wondering when my wife decided she was a martyr instead of a mother. A few nights later, I was at the kitchen table helping Jake stumble through algebra when the phone rang. It was Clara, Rachel's older sister. Her voice came through sweet as honey but sharp enough to cut glass. "Grant, I just wanted to say how proud I am of Rachel," she began. "What she's doing is beautiful, selfless. You should be supporting her instead of making her feel guilty." I clenched the phone so hard I thought it might crack. "Clara, with all due respect, this is between me and my wife." But she cut me off. "No, it's not. She's my sister, and she's giving the gift of life to people who need it. You're being selfish, Jack. You should be ashamed." Selfish. That word again. I looked over at Jake, eraser in his mouth, listening to every word. And for the first time I realized the story Rachel was spreading, painting me as the villain for daring to protect my own family. Sunday after church, I barely made it out of the building before Joanne, my mother-in-law, latched onto my arm like a vice. She wore that fixed smile she always used when she was about to scold me in public but didn't want anyone to notice. "Jack, dear," she cooed, "I want to talk about Rachel's decision. Here we go. What Melissa is doing," she continued, voice dripping with righteousness, "is God's work. She's bringing life into the world for a couple who can't do it themselves. You should be proud, not fighting her." I bit my tongue so hard it hurt. Proud? She wanted me to cheer while my wife carried another man's child? "Joanne," I said, keeping my voice low, "what about our kids, our family? Doesn't that matter?" But she just patted my arm like I was a stubborn child. "Marriage is about supporting each other's sacrifices. Rachel is making a beautiful sacrifice." And just like that, I was the selfish heretic standing against God's plan. By the end of that week, I realized it wasn't just Rachel I was fighting, it was her whole family. Clara called me selfish. Joanne declared Rachel was doing God's work. Even her cousins were sending her messages of support, which of course she made sure I saw. Everywhere I turned, it felt like the jury had already delivered the verdict. Rachel the saint, Jack the villain. At dinner, she quoted her sister's praise. At church, her mother bragged about the noble sacrifice. And me? I was the cold-hearted husband who didn't clap loud enough for the show. The worst part wasn't their judgment. It was the way Rachel's eyes lit up when they applauded her. Like their approval meant more than mine ever had. I sat at that same kitchen table, surrounded by voices telling me I was wrong, selfish, cruel, and for the first time I felt completely alone in my own marriage. It didn't take long before I realized I was outnumbered, completely. Rachel had her mother praising her for doing God's work, her sister calling her a hero, her friends cheering her on like she was running for office. And me? I was the only one saying no. Every time I spoke up, I was painted as the bad guy. Why can't you be more supportive? Why are you so negative? Don't you have any compassion? Compassion? I was the one living in the house that was about to collapse. I was the one who'd have to explain to our kids why their mom was carrying her boss's baby. But none of that mattered to them. The narrative was set. Rachel, the brave woman making a selfless sacrifice. Jack, the bitter husband standing in her way. And the more they rallied around her, the more I felt the walls closing in, like I was shouting into a storm no one else could hear. One night, after another round of Rachel preaching about Richard and Victoria's heartbreak, I finally snapped. I slammed my hand on the table, hard enough to rattle the silverware. "What about our kids?" I shouted. "Jake, Emma, Sophie, do they not matter anymore? While you're playing saint for your boss, who's looking out for them?" Rachel's jaw tightened. She hated when I raised my voice, but I couldn't stop. "Do you really think they'll understand why their mom's belly is growing with someone else's child? Do you think they'll feel proud, or do you think they'll feel abandoned?" She looked at me like I was being dramatic, like I'd suggested sacrificing a goat in the backyard. "Jack, this isn't about them. It's about helping people." And that's when it hit me hardest. She wasn't just ignoring me anymore. She was willing to ignore our own children for the sake of her boss's family. She didn't even flinch. She just leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, and said it as casually as if she were commenting on the weather. "This has nothing to do with us, Jack." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Nothing to do with us? My wife carrying another man's baby had nothing to do with us? I laughed. One of those bitter, humorless laughs that comes out when the alternative is punching a hole in the drywall. "Are you serious, Rachel? You're talking about putting our marriage, our home, our kids through 9 months of chaos, and you think it has nothing to do with us?" She shrugged, cool and dismissive. "It's my choice, my responsibility, not yours." And right there, in that quiet kitchen with our kids' drawings taped to the fridge, I realized the truth. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was just collateral damage in her crusade. That night turned into the ugliest fight we'd ever had. Voices rose, chairs scraped against the floor, and the kids hid in their rooms pretending not to hear. "Rachel, if you do this, our marriage is over," I shouted, my throat raw, my hands shaking. She fired back without missing a beat. "Then maybe you should rethink what being a husband means." The words cut deep, colder than ice, sharper than glass. We stood there across the kitchen, not as partners but as enemies drawing battle lines. Every sentence we hurled only pushed us further apart. I wanted her to stop, to hear me, to see what this was doing to us. But the more I begged, the harder she dug in. Her resolve was like concrete, and my desperation only made it set faster. By the time the shouting died, the silence was worse. Because in that silence, I knew we weren't just drifting apart, we were splitting in two. When the shouting finally cooled into a brittle silence, I looked her dead in the eye. My hands were still trembling, my chest tight, but my voice came out steady. "Rachel, listen carefully," I said. "If you go through with this, if you carry Richard Coleman's baby, our marriage is over. Do you understand me? Over." For a moment, I thought I saw her hesitate. Her eyes softened, like maybe she was realizing the weight of it all. My heart jumped. Maybe I'd finally broken through. But then she smiled. Not the warm smile I fell in love with, but a cold, calculated curve of the lips. "Then maybe," she said, smoothing down her yoga pants, "you should rethink what being a husband means." And just like that, the line was drawn. She'd made her choice. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was just the obstacle in her way. Her words hung in the air like poison. "Then maybe you should rethink what being a husband means." I just stood there staring at her. For 8 years, those lips had spoken vows, laughter, whispered promises in the dark. Now they were spitting out lines sharp enough to gut me. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't even look guilty. She just turned away, like she'd won some invisible argument, and walked upstairs as if she hadn't just buried our marriage with one sentence. I sank into the chair, feeling the weight press down on me. That was it. Not a dramatic slam of the door, not a confession of an affair, just a quiet, surgical strike that left me bleeding in my own kitchen. And the worst part? I realized I'd just watched my marriage die. and there wasn't even a funeral. Just silence. I sat there long after she'd gone upstairs, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the kitchen. My chest felt like it had been split open, every beat of my heart echoing the same brutal truth. She didn't care. The woman I married, the mother of my kids, had looked me in the eye and told me my role as her husband was negotiable. My vows, my love, my warnings, they meant nothing. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to hold myself together, but it was no use. Something inside me had cracked, and no amount of patchwork could fix it. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even shock. It was grief. Grief for the marriage I thought we had. Grief for the teammate I thought I'd chosen. My heart wasn't just breaking, it was already broken. And upstairs, the woman who broke it was sleeping like nothing had happened. The days that followed felt like living inside a cracked mirror. Everything looked familiar, but nothing was whole. We still shared the same house, the same table, the same bed, but the bond that held it all together was gone. I tried to pretend, for the kids' sake. Dinner, homework, bedtime stories. I kept up the routine. But the air between Rachel and me was poisoned. Every word felt sharp, every silence heavier than steel. We weren't a couple anymore. We were two strangers managing a mortgage and 3 kids under one roof, passing each other in the hallway, trading polite nods, like roommates who'd forgotten why they moved in together in the first place. The crack in our marriage wasn't just a crack anymore, it was a canyon. And every attempt I made to reach across only reminded me how far apart we'd drifted. Some fractures heal with time, but this one, it was beyond repair. It didn't take long before talk turned into action. One morning, Rachel came home with a folder from a fertility clinic. Brochures, waivers, medical instructions neatly tucked inside. She laid it on the counter like it was nothing more than a takeout menu. "I've scheduled the IVF," she said, pouring herself coffee like she'd just announced a dentist appointment. "It starts next week." I stared at that folder, at the sterile diagrams of syringes and lab-grown embryos, and felt my stomach twist. This wasn't hypothetical anymore. This was real. She was about to let another man's DNA be planted inside her while I sat powerless in my own kitchen. I wanted to rip the papers up, to shout, to beg one last time. Instead, all I could manage was a whisper, "Rachel, if you do this, you're ending us." She didn't even look up. Then maybe that's what has to happen. And just like that, the countdown had begun. The next 3 months were hell on earth. Every day felt like a tug of war I was destined to lose. I tried everything: reason, logic, anger, even silence. I begged her to reconsider, to think about the kids, to think about us. But Rachel's resolve only hardened. She started living on a different clock: doctor's appointments, hormone shots, late-night calls with Richard and Victoria about progress. Our marriage became background noise, static she tuned out whenever I spoke. I walked on eggshells, hoping for even the smallest sign she'd change her mind. Every morning I woke up praying she'd snap out of it. But every night I went to bed with the same crushing realization: she was already gone. The more I fought, the less I recognized her. The woman I married wasn't in that house anymore. What remained was someone chasing a dream that wasn't ours, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pull her back. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and quiet. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when Rachel walked into the kitchen holding a little white stick in her hand. Her face was a strange mix, fear and triumph tangled together. "It worked," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, my brain refused to process it. All those months of tension, arguments, and warnings had funneled into this single instant. She was carrying another man's baby. The nightmare was no longer hypothetical. It was real. She searched my face, waiting for me to explode, to beg, to fall apart. But there was nothing left to give. I set down my mug, met her eyes, and said the only word I had left. "Okay." Just that. 4 letters. The period at the end of our marriage. Her lips parted, confusion flashing across her face, but I didn't flinch. Because deep down, I'd already left her months ago. That afternoon, I sat in my car outside the office. The pregnancy test still burned into my memory. For 8 years, I'd been the guy who tried to hold it all together. For her, for the kids, for the life we built. But now, I knew it was over. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in years. James Holloway. We'd played baseball together in high school. He was a decent shortstop, terrible at math, and now one of the best divorce attorneys in town. When he picked up, his voice was warm, casual. "Grant Walker, long time. What's up, man?" I swallowed hard. "Jim, it's Jack Miller. I need a lawyer." There was a pause. "Jesus, Jack, what happened?" I leaned back in my seat, staring at the ceiling of my car. "My wife's pregnant with her boss's baby. I told her not to do it. She did it anyway. Now I'm done." Jim went quiet for a few seconds on the line, like he was trying to wrap his head around what I'd just said. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Jack, that's heavy. But listen, if you're serious, come by my office tomorrow. We'll go over everything. Custody, the house, assets, the works." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, do it. I'm serious." When I hung up, I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. The weight of the decision settled in. Filing for divorce wasn't just paperwork. It was pulling the plug on the life I thought we'd built together. But there was no other choice. Rachel had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd picked her boss's family over her own, and now she could live with that decision without me. The next morning, I walked into Jim's office, signed my name on the dotted lines, and started the process of ending 8 years in black and white. Jim didn't waste time. 2 days later, Rachel was served the divorce papers at her office, in front of the same co-workers she'd bragged to about her selfless sacrifice. That evening, my phone blew up with calls and texts until I finally picked up. On the other end, Rachel's voice was raw, broken. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Jack, you can't be serious," she gasped between tears. "You really filed? You're ending us? Over this?" I kept my voice flat. "I told you what would happen. You didn't believe me. That's not my fault," she begged. "Please, Jack, don't do this. I need you. The kids need you. I can't do this alone." But the tears, the trembling, the desperation, it was all too late. She'd had her chance to choose her family. She chose Richard and Victoria instead. Now she was crying for help from the very man she'd pushed away. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry. The next night, my phone lit up again, this time with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Jack," a polished voice said, calm and patronizing. "This is Richard Coleman. I know things have been tense, but what Rachel is doing, it's a beautiful gift. You should be proud of her." I could practically hear his expensive suit through the phone. The man who'd bought my wife's womb was now trying to lecture me about pride. I let him finish his rehearsed speech, then cut him off cold. "Let me make this clear, Richard. You hired my wife to carry your baby. You destroyed my marriage. That makes this your problem, not mine." There was silence on the other end, like no one had ever dared speak to him that way. I hung up, tossed the phone on the counter, and muttered the 6 words that had become my mantra. Not my baby, not my problem. A few days later, my phone buzzed again. Same number, same audacity. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. "Jack." Richard's voice was smoother this time, like he'd practiced. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. What Melissa, what Rachel is doing, it connects all of us. There's a child involved now. We're family in a way." Family. The word made my stomach turn. I cut him off before he could get another polished sentence out. "No, Richard, we are not family. You paid my wife to carry your baby. That's a transaction, not a bond." He tried again. "We need to support each other." "Save it," I snapped. "You wanted a baby, you got one, but you don't get me. You don't get my marriage, my life, or my respect. Handle your own mess." Before he could respond, I ended the call. For the first time in months, I felt lighter, because refusing him wasn't just defiance, it was freedom. By the time the divorce papers were in motion, Rachel had settled into the guest bedroom, pregnant belly growing, prenatal vitamins stacked on the nightstand, baby gear creeping into corners of the house like weeds. And there I was, still under the same roof. We weren't husband and wife anymore. We weren't even partners. We were 2 strangers coexisting in a house built for a family. Every night I heard her moving around upstairs, groaning from back pain, running to the bathroom with morning sickness that lasted all day. Sometimes she'd knock on my door at 2 a.m., and whispering, "Jack, please, I just need help." I'd roll over, stare at the ceiling, and give the same answer every time. Not my baby, not my problem. It killed me to hear her crying on the other side of the wall, but I reminded myself, she chose this. She picked them over us, and I refused to be her safety net anymore. As the pregnancy dragged on, the requests became constant. "Jack, can you help me set up the crib? Jack, can you pick up pickles on your way home? Jack, can you drive me to the doctor's office? Richard and Victoria are out of town." Each time I gave her the same answer, flat and final. Not my baby, not my problem. At first, she looked shocked, like she couldn't believe I meant it. By the 10th time, her face hardened into a permanent scowl, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights and frustration. I watched her shuffle through the house, swollen ankles, hair tied back, juggling nausea and exhaustion alone. And I won't lie, part of me wanted to step in, to help, to be the man I used to be. But then I'd remember every word she'd thrown at me. "This has nothing to do with us." So I stayed cold, because if she could live with her choice, then so could I. It became a ritual. Every time Rachel asked, every time someone hinted I should soften, I gave the same 6 words. Not my baby, not my problem. She hated it. I could see her flinch every time the phrase left my mouth. But I needed it. Needed the mantra like a shield to keep me from breaking. Because deep down, part of me still wanted to cave. Still wanted to help when she winced climbing the stairs or cried quietly in the kitchen at 3 a.m. That old reflex, the husband reflex, never really died. But then I'd remind myself, she'd chosen this path. She'd chosen him. She'd chosen their family over ours. So whenever my resolve wavered, I repeated it under my breath until it hardened again. Not my baby, not my problem. 6 words, cold, final, unshakable. And the more I said them, the more they stopped being just words. They became survival. It wasn't long before people around us started to notice. The neighbors, the folks at church, even the parents at the kids' school. They'd see Rachel waddling around the yard with a belly that didn't belong to me, struggling with groceries or rubbing her swollen ankles while I kept my distance. One Saturday morning, Mr. Daniels, the retired guy next door who waters his lawn like it's his full-time job, cornered me by the trash cans. "Jack," he said, lowering his voice, "everything okay over there? Rachel looks rough. She needs help, son." I kept my face stone cold. "She made her bed, Mr. Daniels. Let her lie in it." He frowned, shook his head. "A man doesn't abandon his wife when she's carrying a child." I clenched my jaw. "And a wife doesn't carry her boss's child. That baby isn't mine." The look on his face said it all. He didn't understand. No one did. The whispers grew louder. Friends, neighbors, even people from church started giving me those looks, the ones that say, "How could you?" To them, Rachel was the fragile, glowing martyr. And me? I was the cold husband who'd abandoned her in her time of need. But I didn't flinch. Not once. When people pulled me aside, "Jack, she needs you," or "Jack, don't be so hard on her," I gave the same reply. She made her choice. Now she lives with it. They could call me cruel, selfish, heartless. I didn't care anymore. I knew the truth. She'd burned our marriage down with her own hands, and I wasn't about to sift through the ashes for her comfort. The more they pushed, the more I doubled down. Because if I gave even an inch, I knew she'd pull me right back into her mess. And I was done being her safety net. It was past midnight when I first heard it, a soft knock at my bedroom door. For a moment I thought I'd dreamed it, but then came her voice, shaky and low. "Jack, are you awake?" I stayed still, staring at the ceiling, every muscle tight. Another knock. "Please, I just need help. The baby's kicking so hard I can't sleep. I'm scared something's wrong." Her words cracked, the kind of desperation that used to rip me in half. A year ago, I would have been out of bed in a second, holding her hand, telling her everything was fine. But now? I rolled over and whispered my shield, the only thing keeping me from falling back into her orbit. Not my baby, not my problem. The silence that followed was worse than any argument. I could hear her breathing on the other side, trembling, waiting. Then finally the sound of her footsteps retreating down the hall, and me, wide awake, drowning in the quiet. I lay there in the dark, eyes fixed on the ceiling, when I heard it, the muffled sobs. At first faint, then louder, breaking through the thin wall between us. Rachel was crying. Not the quiet kind, but the raw, unrestrained sound of someone unraveling. Every instinct in me screamed to get up, to open that door, to put my arms around her like I had 100 times before. But I stayed frozen, fists clenched under the blanket. She'd chosen this path. She'd chosen him. She'd chosen to gamble our family for her boss's gratitude. So I repeated the only thing that kept me anchored. Not my baby, not my problem. Her sobs went on for what felt like hours, echoing through the silence of the house. The kids slept down the hall, oblivious. And me? I stared into the dark, stone still, refusing to break. Because if I opened that door once, I knew I'd never close it again. As the months dragged on, the cracks started to show. Not just between us, but between Rachel and the people she'd sacrificed everything for. Richard and Victoria were there for the photo moments, the ultrasounds, the doctor visits, the big milestones. They brought flowers, snapped pictures, talked about nursery colors. But when the real grind of pregnancy hit, the nausea, the swollen ankles, the sleepless nights, they were nowhere to be found. Richard had important meetings. Victoria had charity events and spa weekends. Their lives were too polished to deal with the mess of swollen feet and midnight cravings. I watched Rachel realize it in real time. Her calls went unanswered, her texts left on read. The glow of purpose she'd wrapped herself in started to fade, replaced by exhaustion and resentment. And when she turned back to me, expecting sympathy, all I gave her was the same 6 words: not my baby, not my problem. It was a Tuesday afternoon at work when my phone started buzzing like a hornet's nest. Rachel. I let the first call go to voicemail, then the second. By the 5th, I finally answered, thinking maybe one of the kids was hurt. Her voice was frantic, panicked. "Jack, it's happening. The baby's coming. I need you." For a split second, instinct kicked in. My mind flashed back to when Jake was born, then Emma, then Sophie, me racing to the hospital, holding her hand, whispering that everything would be okay. But this time, it wasn't my baby. I kept my tone flat. "Then call Richard." "I did. He's in a meeting. Victoria's at a spa in Napa. Please, Jack. I can't do this alone." Her breathing was ragged, terrified. And for a moment, I almost caved. Almost. But instead, I pulled the phone away from my ear, stared at the screen, and pressed the red button. The line went dead. A few hours later, my desk phone rang. The caller ID read St. Mary's Hospital. For a second, my stomach dropped. I thought maybe something had happened to one of the kids. "Mr. Miller?" a nurse's voice asked politely. "Your wife Rachel is here. She's given birth to a healthy baby boy. She's asking if you can come." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My throat went dry, but my answer came out cold and sharp. "I'm not the father," I said flatly. "Call Richard Coleman. He's the father." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that meant the nurse wasn't sure if she'd heard me right. "Sir, she's asking specifically for you." "And I'm telling you," I interrupted, "this has nothing to do with me. That's Coleman's child, not mine." I gave them his office number, hung up, and turned back to my paperwork like nothing had happened. While I drove to pick up Jake, Emma, and Sophie from school, Rachel was in a hospital bed, bringing another man's baby into the world, alone. No husband at her side, no Richard, no Victoria. Just the fluorescent lights, the beeping monitors, and a team of strangers guiding her through the most brutal hours of her life. Later, I'd hear that she cried out for me during labor, begged the nurses to call again, swore she couldn't do it without me. But I never showed. I was at home helping Emma with her homework, laughing at Sophie's yogurt-covered face, listening to Jake ramble about science projects. Meanwhile, Rachel screamed into a pillow, clutching the rails of the bed, realizing too late that the people she'd sacrificed our marriage for had left her to fight alone. And when it was over, when she held that baby boy in her arms, The room was silent, because no one she loved had stayed. That evening, while Rachel was cradling another man's newborn in a sterile hospital room, I was at home with my kids, our real kids. Jake was beaming, waving around the volcano project he'd aced. Emma stomped through the living room because someone had taken her favorite pencil at school. Sophie sat in her booster seat, face smeared with pizza sauce, demanding pancakes for dessert. It was noisy, messy, chaotic, and it was perfect. For the first time in months, the house felt alive again. Not heavy with tension, not drowned in arguments or Rachel's endless justifications. Just me and my kids, laughing at spilled milk, debating over cartoons, existing in the beautiful, ordinary rhythm of family life. While Rachel's gift screamed in some NICU bassinet, I tucked my 3 children into bed, kissed their foreheads, and whispered what they needed to hear most. Daddy's here. Daddy's not going anywhere. And for the first time in almost a year, I believed it. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, my phone buzzed. Rachel. For a moment, I almost ignored it. But curiosity won. I answered. Her voice was thin, cracked with exhaustion. Jack, please, I need you. I can't do this alone. The baby's here, he's beautiful, but Richard and Victoria... Her words broke off into sobs. They're not here. No one's here. Just me. I closed my eyes, leaning against the counter. For years I'd been her anchor, the one who steadied her when life knocked her down, and hearing her like that twisted something in me. But then I remembered every fight, every dismissal, every time she said this has nothing to do with us. So I steadied my voice and answered, calm, final. Call Coleman, Rachel. He's the father, not me. There was silence, then a faint whimper, and I ended the call, shutting off my phone. For the first time, I felt nothing. 3 days after the birth, Rachel came home. Not alone, she brought the baby with her. She shuffled through the door, pale, hollow-eyed, cradling that infant like he was both a treasure and a curse. She set up camp in the guest room, but the chaos spread fast. Bottles piled in the sink, formula cans cluttered the counters. Dirty diapers overflowed the trash. The whole house reeked of baby powder and sleepless nights. Our 3 kids tiptoed around, confused and unsettled. Sophie tugged on my sleeve one morning and whispered, Daddy, why is the baby here? I thought he wasn't ours. I had no answer that a 4-year-old could understand. Meanwhile, Rachel stumbled through the house like a ghost, begging for help, looking at me with pleading eyes. But every time she asked, I gave her the same words. Not my baby, not my problem. And the more I said it, the colder her silence became. It was 2 weeks later, past midnight. The baby was screaming again, red-faced, relentless, like an alarm that never shut off. Rachel came down the stairs clutching him, hair wild, eyes sunken. Jack, she pleaded, voice cracking. Just 10 minutes. Hold him so I can shower, please. I was at the table with Jake's math homework spread in front of me, trying to focus on anything but her. My jaw tightened. Not my baby, not my problem, I muttered without looking up. Her voice rose, shrill and furious. You owe me this much. I'm your wife. That was it. I stood, slamming my hand against the table so hard the pencil rolled to the floor. You're not my wife anymore, Rachel. Not in any way that matters. You gave that up the second you chose him. Her face went pale, lips trembling. But I didn't stop. You want to play house with Coleman's baby? Then do it without me. The baby screamed upstairs. Rachel screamed downstairs, and I stood in the middle, finally done pretending there was anything left to fight for. You're abandoning me, she shrieked, clutching the baby like a shield. What kind of man leaves his wife in a moment like this? I shook my head, grabbing my keys from the counter. You stopped being my wife the second you chose Richard over me. Don't twist this. You abandoned us. Her face crumpled. Fury and despair tangled together. You're cruel, Jack. Heartless. No, I said, my voice calm now, almost cold. I'm just done cleaning up your mess. I walked out the door, the night air hitting me like freedom. For hours I drove aimlessly, talk radio buzzing in the background while my mind finally went quiet. When I came home, her car was gone. So was the baby. Rachel had packed up, fled into the night with her gift. And for the first time in months, my house felt like mine again. For 2 glorious days after Rachel left, the house was quiet, peaceful. The kids and I fell into a rhythm: cereal for dinner, cartoons without sighs about screen time, laughter without tension simmering in the background. But peace never lasts. On the 3rd day, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. First was Clara, Rachel's sister. Her voice dripped with righteous indignation. "Jack, how dare you? Rachel's at my place, crying her eyes out with a newborn, and you've abandoned her. You're a selfish bastard." Then came Joanne, my mother-in-law, launching a 5-minute guilt trip about sacrifice and God's work. After that, even Melissa's old college roommate, someone I'd met twice in 8 years, left a voicemail telling me I was disgusting for not supporting my wife in her noble act. It was like Rachel had sent out a mass alert. Attention, world. Jack's the villain. Attack accordingly. They all wanted to shame me, but none of them lived in my house. None of them had to face what she'd done. One night during dinner, as Sophie tried to balance peas on her fork, my phone buzzed again. The caller ID nearly made me laugh out loud. Richard Coleman. I put him on speaker. If he was going to waste my time, my kids deserved to hear the circus too. "Jack," he began in that syrupy tone, "I just want to clear the air. What Rachel has done, it's incredible. She's given us the most precious gift. You should be proud of her, not bitter." I dropped my fork and leaned in. "Listen carefully, Richard. You hired my wife's body. You destroyed my marriage. And now you think you can smooth it over with pretty words? No. You wanted a baby. You got one. But you don't get me, my family, or my respect. This is your mess. Handle it." Silence. For the first time, the mighty Richard Coleman had no script. I ended the call with one last reminder. Not my baby, not my problem. Not my... 6 months after I filed, we finally ended up in court. The place smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee, but Rachel walked in like it was a stage. Black dress, hair tied back, eyes red but perfectly framed for sympathy. Behind her sat Clara, Joanne, and, of course, Richard and Victoria, looking like they were attending a charity gala instead of the wreckage of my marriage. Her lawyer, some slick guy with a fake tan, painted Rachel as a saint. "Your Honor, my client made the ultimate sacrifice, carrying a child for a couple who could not have one. Instead of supporting her, her husband abandoned her while she was pregnant. Cold, heartless, unforgivable." The glares from the gallery burned into me like I was some cartoon villain twirling my mustache while pushing a pregnant woman into the street. Rachel sniffled on cue, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. And in that moment, to everyone watching, I wasn't a man protecting his family. I was the monster who walked away. When Rachel's lawyer finished his grand performance, my attorney, Jim Holloway, the same kid I used to play baseball with, stood up, calm and steady. He carried a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "Your Honor," he began, "my colleague's story is compelling. Unfortunately, it doesn't match the facts." He opened the folder and pulled out printouts. Exhibit A, text messages between Mrs. Miller and her sister. Here she writes, "Jack is being such a baby about this. It's my body, my choice. He doesn't get a vote." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Rachel went pale. Jim wasn't done. Exhibit B, emails between Mrs. Miller and her employer, Mr. Coleman, arranging the surrogacy, without once mentioning her husband's objections. Then he pressed play on a recording. My own voice filled the room. "If you do this, our marriage is over." Rachel's reply followed, sharp as ice. "Then maybe you should rethink what being a husband means." The judge leaned back, expression shifting. Finally, the truth was cutting through the act. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Morrison adjusted his glasses and looked over the files one last time. His voice was calm, but every word hit like a hammer. "This court finds," he began, "that the dissolution of this marriage was the direct result of unilateral decisions made by the plaintiff, Mrs. Miller, without regard for her spouse's clearly stated objections." Rachel's face collapsed, the performance mask cracking wide open. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "Mrs. Miller's decision to prioritize her employer's wishes over her marriage demonstrates a disregard for the stability required to maintain a healthy family environment. Therefore, primary custody of the 3 minor children is awarded to Mr. Jack Miller. The plaintiff will have supervised visitation, at times determined by a court-appointed mediator." The gavel struck like thunder. It was over. Rachel broke down sobbing, Clara clutching her, Joanne glaring daggers at me. But for the first time in nearly a year, I felt air fill my lungs. I hadn't just survived, I'd won back my kids. The gavel still echoed when Rachel crumpled at her table, mascara streaking down her face. Her sobs filled the courtroom, raw and ugly, no longer the polished act she'd tried to sell. Clara wrapped an arm around her, shooting me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Joanne dabbed her eyes, shaking her head like I'd just committed a sin against heaven itself. "I don't want to lose them," Rachel choked out between sobs, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I can't lose my kids." I stood, straightened my tie, and picked up the same briefcase I'd carried for years. Then I looked at her one last time. "You should have thought about that," I said evenly, "before carrying another man's baby." Her wail followed me as I walked out, but I didn't look back. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't the one drowning in regret. I was free, and my children were safe. 6 months later, my life looks nothing like it did before, and thank God for that. Saturday mornings, the kids and I crowd the kitchen. Jake tries to flip pancakes, Emma argues over how much syrup is too much, and Sophie sneaks chocolate chips into the batter when she thinks I'm not looking. The dog we still don't have gets begged for at least twice before breakfast. It's loud, messy, imperfect. And it's ours. No tension, no begging, no stranger's baby crying in the next room, just real life, chaotic and ordinary in the best way. I learned something in all of this. You can't save people from the weight of their own choices. You can only protect the ones who matter. Not my baby, not my problem. But these kids, this home, this peace we're building together, that's mine. And I'll never let anyone take it from us again.